Good evening, I'm Mark Davis, the Managing Editor for News at VPR. We hope you enjoyed that special sneak preview of Storm Lake. This evening, we've invited a distinguished panel of Vermont newspaper veterans to help us learn about the current state of news and newspapers in Vermont, and we'll hope you'll join us in that conversation. Please join me in welcoming Paula Routley, the publisher and editor of 7 Days. Before she started 7 Days with Pamela Polston in 1995, Paula worked as a dance critic, an arts writer, and a news reporter. In addition to editing 7 Days, Paula also oversees finances, management, and product development at the weekly newspaper. And full disclosure, she used to be my boss. Welcome, Paula. Angelo Lynn is here. He is the editor and publisher of Addison Press, Inc. He publishes the Addison County Independent, The Reporter in Brandon, and 2 magazines, Vermont Ski and Ride and Vermont Sports. He's also president of the New England Newspaper and Press Association Board of Directors. Welcome, Angelo.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Susan Allen, the newly installed editor of the Bennington Banner. Prior to this, she was an aide to Governors Howard Dean and Peter Shumlin. She's been the editor at the Barre Montpelier Times-Argus and a State House reporter for the Associated Press and the Burlington Free Press. Sue, thank you for being here. And if you have questions or comments for our guests this evening, please type them into the chat box along with your name and what city you are watching from, and we will do our very best to address the panel as the evening goes on. Angelo, I want to start with you. This film posed questions large and small about the current life of a small town newspaper. Most important question you can ask a journalist. Did they get it right?
They got it pretty right. Yeah, it's a tough business. It always has been. And I thought what really came through on the movie was that it's, as he said, the pay is lousy, the hours are terrible, but it gets under your skin, into your soul, and the people who do this love doing it. And I think that part came through in the movie just fine. And it was very accurate. Are we the same in Vermont? I think the one thing that's not quite accurate here is are the newspapers in Vermont quite in the dire straits that he is? And he seems to be a little worse off than most of the papers, I would say, are in Vermont. A couple of things about that. We don't have such a conflicted community here. We're not as partisan, it seems like. He has a pretty partisan community there, and I think that's a struggle, particularly when you're in the minority view, which he seems to be, and very well spoken at that. So he generates a lot of negative feedback from his community that a lot of us here in Vermont don't have to deal with as much. But let me move on to something else. You know, the statistics nationwide, if people picked up on that part of the story, it is pretty revealing. In the last 15 years, there's been about 25% of the newspapers in the country that have gone under. And, you know, that's a pretty horrendous number. And during COVID, it was even worse for some. Without the PPP during COVID, it would have been a really terrible state of affairs. But here's the kicker to me on this, and it can happen here. It hasn't happened quite to that extent. In Vermont, we've been pretty lucky most of the places. But my core question is, why should people care? What do these papers mean to the community out there? And I think we're pretty fortunate in Vermont, but it's worth just going over a couple of things. And I would just say quickly, readers can trust community newspapers, and they get that trust because we go out there, we're in the communities, we're on the ground floor, they see us out there reporting. Most of the time the people know what's going on, or know, some of these people know as well. If we get it wrong, boy, they call you first thing in the morning, and you know you've got a correction in the paper because you can't get away with much. So that's real accountability, or in trust. So you build trust, and you've been there for a long time, and you've got that trust for a long time. That makes a big difference. And the second reason is that these community papers hold public officials accountable. That is one of those core functions that we do. And it's even true in towns where there isn't a ton of corruption going on. And that, you know, it's a deterrent. When you know your local paper's there, you behave. And that's how it should be. You lose those papers, and that's going to be a real difference. And the final thing is just building community. One of the core principles that all of us journalists do at large is that we're building communities. We provide good information. That information helps people advance their towns forward and build a stronger environment for all citizens. And you can't do that without good reporting and information. I'll notice one thing to this that came out in Oregon. There is an act out there. Lots of things are going on to try to help journalism, because that's part of the main message of this film is, what are we going to do about this? Papers are struggling. That's one message. The other message is, what's the solution? And in the Build Back Better reconciliation bill, there is a tax credit for reporters that was in there. It was taken out. There was a little effort to get it back in. It did go back in, but one of the reasons that is out in Oregon, a group of papers ran blank front pages that just said, what if there were, a little line of type on a blank front page that said, what if there were no reporters? And if people would think about that, that's the difference. If you don't have those pages of your paper are blank, what do you do? And I think that's a great image to think about as we think about the impact of community newspapers and how can we make them stronger.
There's so much in this film I want to dive into, but I almost want to skip to the ending here. And they inevitably talked about the pandemic and the sudden and dramatic impact it had on their business. Paula, can you walk us through how the pandemic affected your newspaper and how you evaluate the Vermont media landscape as we sit here today, almost 2 years into it?
Well, I agree with Angelo that things are not as dire here. And that's in large part because Vermonters, I think, support journalism and recognize the value of it. One of the things that happened to 7 Days is that we were a free newspaper, so we don't have subscribers. But the pandemic gave us an opportunity to ask people for help. And so we did that for the first time. And we were always too shy to do it before. I don't know, we thought people would, think we were going out of business or something. But when the pandemic hit, we asked, and we now have 3,000 people giving us regular donations, and we didn't really know who our readers were before. So now I feel like we have a relationship with our readers that we didn't have before, and I've started writing every week. I didn't think I'd keep doing it, but I just haven't ran out of things to say. Trying to explain to people, what we're up against and how the business works, and that's also helped build relationships too. So I do letters to the editor, and then the people give us a donation. It's just it's very different than it was. So it's kind of a silver lining of the pandemic. But I do worry that more, we haven't seen the full effect of the pandemic on newspapers. It's been tough. Right now we're doing okay because we have all the help wanted ads. So, because of the staffing crisis, we're benefiting from that. We're hoping that when that wanes, the regular advertising will come back, but it's a hustle.
So the hero of the documentary, editor Art Cullen, it said at one point in this film that newspapers weave the fabric of the community, ways large and small. And he also said later that a town is about as strong as its newspapers and its banks. And I'm wondering, weaving the fabric of the community in ways large and small, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to the Bennington Banner?
First of all, our readers demand community coverage. When I took over, we had come off a period where the Bennington Banner was short-staffed and borrowed copy from its sister paper in Brattleboro. So a lot of the front page stories had more to do with Brattleboro than it did with Bennington. And the readers don't like that. They want to know, they want their front page to be entirely about Bennington. And he had a line in there that really struck me. I'm going to sort of make it fit mine. If it didn't happen in Bennington County, it didn't happen. And that's kind of my view of my front page now. And once in a blue moon, a national story will land on my front page, but generally not. I'll put the big high school football game on the front page before I'll look for a national story and make it fit. It was interesting. I went to the the paper's webpage, the Storm Lake Times webpage this morning, just to see what they were looking like now and to read his editorial. You can't get in, you have to pay. I could not open the paper, so that's different for him. But his front page looked just as local when you looked at it. His editorial was about how much better he's doing since this film got talked about. People are giving him some money, and so he's back on his feet. I find there's been an incredibly positive response from the community for our local focus. They don't take it for granted. They've noticed it, they appreciate it. They come in and talk about it, and they call with story ideas. And as Angelo said, they're mad at you if you miss something or you get something wrong. I love that. I think it's fabulous. I think that's what community papers are.
I want to remind people, if you have any questions or comments for our guests, please feel free to type them in the chat box along with your name and what city you're watching from, and we'll try to address them in the show. Angelo, I don't want to sort of go too far into nostalgia here. I think it's fair to say we all love print newspapers on this panel and devote a lot of our energies to them. But let's go the other way. Why should people care about a print product? We have the internet. We have lots of other forms of information that we did not have 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Why should we care about print newspapers in 2021?
Yeah, I think that's a real good question, Mark. It's, when I look at print products, they do a couple of things that the internet doesn't, or radio or even TV or whatever. And the print product is lasting. It's there, you can pick it up, you can read it, you can study it, and you can get more complex ideas out. So it's a really good place to discuss, larger issues. I think right now a great issue is school consolidation. And this is a great point. We have 4 schools in our county. I think we're an exception to the rule here, to Act 46. But we have Ripton and Lincoln, Starksboro's on the edge. Addison tried to pull out of their school districts. This is not wanting to be closed and not wanting to be consolidating the school district. And these are super complicated issues because you're talking about the feeling of these, the real strong feelings of a small community that says we're going to lose our identity if we lose our small school. But on the other hand, the school district is saying, look, educating 48 people in its own town has all these economic problems. How are we going to afford this for the district? How can we do this? And is the academic offering as good? And so these are pretty complicated issues. So looking at that issue, putting that out there for the community to really study from the school board's perspective, from the community's perspective that might be closed. These are complicated issues and people like to study them. And I think issues that need to be studied, print's a real resource for that. Another one, just to add to that, Christopher Russ, one of our reporters that was covering the issues up in the Mount Abe region, went back and did a 7-part series on school consolidation, 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. And, we all think these issues are new, but no, back in the 60s and 70s, these same things are going on. So he went back and did this pretty thorough report to kind of bring the public back and say, look, we've been to here before. This isn't easy. We all need to understand that these are complicated issues and really look at that focus. So these are things that print, I think, has a real important impact on and can, from a news perspective, it can help the community get around a single issue. And, hopefully the same is true with advertising. It's a lasting medium, the other things there. And I think we all do that pretty well. We're all, we all do digital too, and we all should be doing digital too. And so that's an important part of this. It's not just print only. We all break our big stories online every day.
Mark, can I disagree with Angelo just for a little bit? He's my dear friend, so I say this with lots of love. To me, print is just a format. It's a piece of paper that you hold and you read. And that's not, to me, the important piece. I know, for example, my kids who are 33 and 30, I don't know that they've ever held a newspaper in their hand. They get all their news online. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I have read probably 7 newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, including my own paper and your papers online. I still want and expect great reporting. That's what matters to me. The format doesn't matter so much. It does at this moment because older readers really want their piece of paper. They want to hold a newspaper in their hands. But younger readers, they don't really care how they get it. They just want it, and they want it fast, and they don't want to wait to the next day to pick up their paper out of the driveway and see what the story was. So I disagree with you a little bit. I'm not as wed to a print product as I am to really high quality local journalism, updating stories all day long on a new format so that they don't get stale and they're relevant to people's lives. So I disagree just a little bit.
Let me jump in real quick before Paula jumps in. And I would say there's yet another reason. In statistics, Sue will say that the average person that goes online, for the Bennington Banner or the Addison Independent or anything, New York Times, they're going to hit maybe 5, 7, 10 stories at max. I don't know about you, but I have about 100 stories in an average newspaper. And they're missing 90 of them. And part of that is the reader doesn't know to look for some stories that they would be interested in if they were flipping through the paper. That's why I pick up 7 Days. I flip to it to see every page because I might run into something that I didn't know I was interested in. Same thing with the New York Times. Most of us read the New York Times online, but when we used to read it in print, you would learn so much more from not just selecting the 5 or 7 stories that you thought you had time for in that publication. So the value of this newspaper, this print product that's out there every week or every day, is that you get put in touch with your wider community. You break out of your own little silo of news. And this is what's so devastating to our communities right now. We only get what we want because of the algorithm out there. And that's not good. We want to be broader citizens. We want to know what the 4-H is doing, even though I have no connection to that club. But it's good to know that they're out there doing good things. So that's another reason.
Paula, could there be a 7 Days online only? How important is the print product to your operation now and looking forward?
It's still, where most of the income comes from, for sure. And I mean, 7 Days is more like a magazine. And thank you, Angela, for describing what I hope the experience is like. But, you want to, the hope is that people discover things they didn't know about when they page through it. I wonder actually, Mark, if in audio, in broadcasting, there's a similar thing where the radio versus podcast, where people are choosing what they want to hear versus maybe they're going to hear something that they didn't know they were interested in. We're trying to cover all aspects of the community, and in hopes that people will be interested in something. Yeah.
So we were talking before we came on air here, and we were both remarking that there was some emotional pull in this film for us. I would say I spent 5 years working for Paula as a reporter at 7 Days, and 9 years as a reporter at the Mighty Valley News, and still have that deep love of being in a print newsroom. And there were moments that really got to me, and you said there were as well. Can you talk a little bit about what it was that hit you and why?
Yeah, a couple of things. Probably the most powerful moment in the film for me was seeing the stacks of papers that have folded, and you saw the front page of the newspaper that had gone under. And I immediately went to, oh my God, I hope I don't have to write that front page story ever for my paper or for any paper I work for. It was a stake in the heart. But then some other things when, they're talking about cutting TV channels, just desperately trying to save a little money here and a little money there. And we've all done that. We've had to make some decisions and make some cuts just because we're trying to keep ourselves afloat. I was also touched that it was such a family operation, and I'm going to give Angelo a plug here because he comes from a family of journalists, and his brother owned the St. Albans Messenger, and he works with his daughters, and he is very much a family operation. So as I watched this movie, I was thinking about Angelo and the Lynns and how they as a unit are trying to keep this battle going.
We have
Well,
we have a comment I want to share with you all from Ross from Hardwick. He notes that kids still like to cut out the sports stories of their high school games and keep them. Angelo, is that true? And other things that people just want to cut out and have that physical product that you put out?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we just had down in the Brandon Reporter, we ran 2 full pages almost of the Proctor High School state championship girls. They won it for the 3rd year in a row, been there 11 times last year, 11 years. It's quite a dynasty story there, and they're very proud of it in the community, and to have that kind of coverage is terrific. And hopefully they will cut those out and keep them around the whole 2 pages with any luck. But that's true of almost every photo that's in the paper. People clip it out. I still have a picture of myself and my youngest daughter kayaking in Burlington in Lake Champlain that the Free Press took of all places, like 35 years ago. I think it's still on my desk. And I see this all over the place. Go into some office and you'll see old photos, around people's desks all the time. So there's a scrapbook sort of feel to it. There's a permanence. It's a little bit like it's their own. And hopefully these community papers, the community and the public does feel like it's their own. It's their newspaper. The great thing, I'm going to just say something about Sue when she's talking about changing things, because she was mentioning that earlier. Make a little change and the readers go, oh my gosh. And it's because they respond to you. I don't know if you have had this, but it's like, what are you doing to my newspaper? And that's the highest compliment when the reader says, why are you changing my newspaper? And well, you're right. Yeah, fair enough.
Paul, I think it's often said that Vermont is quite fortunate to have in 7 days in VT Digger and in VPR some fairly strong statewide outlets that have been able to increase their news presence over the past couple decades. But I think perhaps a lot of people don't quite appreciate the extent to which outlets like ours very much rely on the on-the-ground reporting of the Bennington Banners and the Addy Indies of the world to help us understand the state and to look for story ideas, frankly. Can you try to explain that to people who might not be familiar with it?
I might embarrass you by saying that was your forte.
Darn right.
Was finding the quirky town story that, that another paper covered, and Mark would disappear for a few days and come back with, a blockbuster cover story. We all sort of are picking and choosing what we're going to write about, and that's not the same as covering a community day in and day out, all the meetings. And I know that some of the local community newspapers in Vermont are having trouble finding people to do that municipal reporting. It's hard work, and there isn't the same pipeline of reporters that we used to have. That wasn't really addressed. These guys, the Storm Lake Times has solved that problem by hiring all their relatives, but
I think that's right.
I'm more worried about the little for-profit newspapers in every town. We're so lucky to have as many as we do, but I think they're really imperiled, and we Angela and I have been trying to figure out how we can help, and what it might look like, a foundation like Storm Lake did, or something. It would be really great if we could receive donations and people would get tax deductions for them, which is not the case because we're for profit. So if you care about your little community newspaper and you want to give them $50,000, you're not getting a tax deduction for it. So that would be nice.
Angelo, Sue, any ideas for how people can support community newspapers like yours besides subscribing and being attentive readers? What else is out there? What could help in the future?
Buy ads. Be an active. Understand that the newspaper is part of your active downtown. It's part of your economy. Buy the paper. Subscribe to the paper. Buy ads from the paper. realize that you could lose your paper. I'm sort of making a blatant pitch here to my businesses in my downtown. We need you. I mean, we really, really need you. And there's no way to sugarcoat that. And we need the subscribers. We need you to hang in there. And, you know, a lot of subscribers joke and put down their local papers. It's just sort of a thing that's, since I was a kid, people have done. But you need your local papers. So step up and be there.
Yeah, I would echo that. You can donate. And by the way, during the pandemic, a lot of people came forward and just out of the, they were concerned and they stepped forward and they said, look, what can we do? Can we send you money? And they started sending you money and you were going, great. And, this really, and particularly in the first couple of months before you knew that you had, that PPP may help, that was a scary moment because ad revenues did drop 50%. Art was right. When they were talking about ad revenues dropping 50% during the pandemic, that was absolutely true. Mm-hmm. Right across the state, it was about that much around here as well. And, it was a scary thing. And advertising is still not back to where it was. I think that's safe to say. Some advertising, as Paula said, Help Wanted is back. But some of the retail places got pretty hurt. And just to note that the challenges that newspapers face today, they're multiple, but because the internet is out there and social media and that sort of thing, it's just another avenue for businesses to use that didn't used to be there 10 or 15 years ago. And this is why that newspapers, so many, there's a stress. We have another competitor in the marketplace. Locally, it's a great thing to shop local. We all say shop local, shop local, shop local. And all those merchants want to shop local. And then they turn around and buy a Google ad or a Facebook ad. That's not shopping local. Just, to put a fine point in it, that is not shopping local.
We've got a couple, sorry.
We local newspaper needs it.
We just got a couple great viewer questions. I want to make sure we get time for some excellent questions. Paula, the first one is to you because it's just right up your alley. Ken asks, do you consider a paper local if it is owned by a national corporation like the Free Press? Is that a local paper?
No, I don't.
Why?
Well, I mean, the difference when you have to live in the place that you're reporting on, and I think the Collins illustrate that really well. And actually, wasn't in the movie, but when he was on Fresh Air, he talked about there is another paper in that town, and it's part of a chain. So he was explaining, how they're the local paper. You have to. It's like, the best restaurants are they're the people who own them are working in them. I don't think that you have the same commitment or accountability for not living in the community that you cover.
The second question is from, go ahead, Angela.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a fair analogy to say that is McDonald's local because it's in town?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a fair question.
Yeah, our second question comes from Glenn McCrae in Burlington. Sue, this one to you. How does a platform like Front Porch Forum fit into the local journalism ecosystem here in Vermont? He notes that local coverage is moving to more of a mixture set of platforms. How can they coordinate? How can we coordinate with them so that we're not redundant, but yet we remain independent?
That's a great question. And I'm a huge fan of Front Porch Forum, and I sign up for as many as I can get let on. My husband signs up for them. They're full of good story ideas, for one thing. They're so hyper local. They're talking about what's going on in people's backyards, and that is fabulous. And you can get so many good story ideas from that. And it's, the reality is all of that is out there, and it can make us angry, and it can feel like it's eroding our coverage areas. Or it can contribute to our coverage. It can contribute to what we do, and we can partner and get ideas and share through those forums. And that's kind of the direction that I think this industry is heading in, is moving sort of, again, I'm sort of coming back to the point that Angelo doesn't agree with me, but moving away from just a piece of paper to different forms that are going to be there, whether we like it or we don't like it. And people are going to choose them, whether we like that or we don't like that. So if we can find a way to meld our products, that's fabulous. And I just think Front Porch Forum is the perfect example of hyper local news in your neighborhood.
Paula, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I made this point earlier, but before we were recording, but I'm really surprised that Storm Lake Times didn't start a Spanish edition, proactively, and there was obviously a Spanish paper there that they're now maybe partnering with, but that seemed like an obvious business opportunity when those workers started coming to town, and 50% speak Spanish and 40% speak English. You should be writing your paper in Spanish as well as English. And it seems like they're going to collaborate, but I think it would have been smart for them to do that first.
Angelo, Front Porch Forum and outlets like that, is that something that can help? Is that frankly opposition that could be a problem for you down the line? Do you work with them?
I don't think it's a problem for the Addison Independent. I think it can be problems for the community, and I think the community needs to understand a few things. And we have to kind of be careful about media literacy here. And when you look at Facebook and what we believe and what we don't believe, then you have to take that into mind, right? So the problem with Front Porch Forum in a news context is that there's no real editor. And so you have people that can post things that may not quite be right. So in our communities, for example, we've seen numerous times where somebody's posted a comment or two online and it gets picked up by several others who are of the same ilk. It's just not true. Or it's got, they left out the other side. And so then the town is going, we get calls from the select board member, oh my gosh, this is, you got to correct that in the paper. It's like, well, okay, but that's not Front Porch Forum's focus. They don't have an editor. They don't monitor those sorts of discussions except for profanity and that sort of thing, but they don't have editors there. So the public has to understand that medium is not a news medium per se. It's not that's not where you get your select board news story. It's not where you get your school board story. It's where you hear things and then hopefully you turn to your newspaper or the TV or something, a radio station to check it out and be sure it's true. And that doesn't always happen. So we have to kind of just be careful out there in these forums. And I think it's an education thing. And I think we have to all understand that these are relatively new products out there. All this has come up in the last 10 years. Some people just go on them. We're still pioneering this internet, this social media, these mechanisms in terms of news. And so understanding that and putting it into the right context is fairly important. And that's a role for all of us to be a part of.
Paula, Ken notes that social media has no liability, but newspapers do.
Oh, I love that one.
I think I know what he's getting at, but can you explain why that's a problem?
Is that Ken Picard?
Possible.
No, this is I don't think people realize this. If we write something that's libelous in a story, or if we print someone's letter, a libelous letter, we are sued. Social media has none of that. They are considered a bulletin board, and it's a different legal standard, which is part of the reason that we are in the pickle that we're in. It's infuriating, and I hope it's going to change. It seems like people are starting to come around on Facebook finally. Looking forward to that.
So in the film, Art Cullen talks a lot about the power of educating the populace in a democracy and why newspapers and fact-based reporting is so vital to functioning democracy on the national level and the local level. However, the current political climate, the fake news era, a time in which it doesn't seem like we can agree on any kind of basic facts, is that still something that really helps newspapers? Is that something that really is even still relevant, sadly, day to day?
It's interesting. We have very little of that in my paper because we're just so focused on what's going on in our community, and that is not front and center in Bennington. That division is not. There's just a lot of things going on. There's, buildings and restaurants opening, and there's so much more positive to cover. I find the real value in our paper is, for example, we're covering a statewide issue on homelessness, and there are people camping on the State House steps, and people are mad at the governor for not extending the hotel vouchers. And one of our reporters just went to some of these hotels that are homeless shelters now and knocked on doors and talked to real people in Bennington. He found a little boy that actually hoards food because he's concerned he won't have a meal at night and has to do his homework outside the hotel door with his father on a little desk in the outdoors. So we took an issue that I'm sure made people's eyes glaze over and they didn't really understand. And we found people right in our community that are impacted by it. And I guarantee you, people then read those bigger, broader stories with a different perception. It suddenly matters to them. They have neighbors that are actually in that situation. And to me, that's the value of a local paper. It's not as concerned with a $2 million budget. It's concerned with how that budget's going to impact the people on Main Street and the businesses on Main Street and the schools. And we bring those issues home and put a human face on them. And then that makes people pay attention to the bigger issues as well, because there's a relevancy that wasn't there before.
Angela, yours is a family business. I'm sure you spent a lot of time pondering the future and future generations. What do you honestly see as the future of the newspaper business for you and for others in Vermont?
That's a tough one. I do believe that the community will find ways to support community journalism. And I think the challenge will be if the market continues to go as it has, and partly this is, two things: the expense of print and the lack of expense on the other side. Digital is a much more convenient, low cost solution. And this has always been the case. We've seen this coming for 20 years. But that it erodes is so far, very few local papers have figured out a way to sustain themselves on digital revenue. And if that's the case, 7 days is not in their follows not in their head. And I think that's a pretty fair statement out there. The third leg of the stool, there's, we have circulation, we have advertising, and we have circulation or subscription revenue. The other one would be donations, and that's the VPR. It's the Digger model, and I do believe that a lot of communities, particularly in Vermont, want to be in that position to help their newspaper if they can, and having a tax exempt status or creating foundations like Storm Lake was able to. These are ways that I think can perpetuate the newspaper industry and businesses in Vermont for a long time to come.
Paul, I totally ambushed Angela with that question. You've had a little more time to ponder it. How would you try to tackle that one?
Well, I mean, Angela's got his daughters. We've built, a staff with succession in mind, which, my greatest hope is that the newspaper will live on. Pamela semi-retired at the end of August, and but we have a great team of people that love this work and don't mind the bad pay and the long hours. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that our model will survive, but I agree with Angela. I mean, no one could have imagined the pandemic and, everything falling away at the same time. So and we're always looking for new revenue streams, but the philanthropic one is something we're working on now.
Speaking of that, we had a comment from Tortoise, who notes that Report for America has helped to beef up newspaper staffs in Vermont, including the Banner and VT Digger. A plus for the journalist, the papers, and the communities, Tortoise says. I I'll go ahead and agree with that statement. Vermont Public Radio has also benefited from Report for America, which, for those who don't know, is a national nonprofit that essentially helps fund reporters at outlets across the country that pick up a significant portion of the salary and help outlets add where they couldn't. Sue, does that sound right to you? The Report for America program been a help?
Yeah, the programs like that will help. And I think the journalism schools are turning out some kids who have some really fresh thinking on how to get news into people's hands and on their screens. And, you know, the truth is the three of us are going to sort of phase out and a whole new generation is going to come in and they're going to have fresh thinking on it. And in the perfect world, it's a paper product and people love it. And we're putting out our robust newspapers and advertising is great. But there's a whole nother scenario where we're all online. We're doing a little bit what Digger's doing, and we have a loyal readership that's just coming to a different format to find quality, high quality journalism. That's my hope, that we just hang on to our quality, our fact-based, our accuracy, our telling really great stories that people want to read, not trying to force stories on them that we think they should read and they're not interested in. I'm much more optimistic about the future, I think, than maybe some others, but you know, I think we're going to be robust there'll be a role, and what it looks like, I'm not 100% sure. I have a different vision, I think, than some of the others on this, but I'm very optimistic about it.
And of course, the film itself ends on a somewhat optimistic note that the Storm Lake Times has joined forces with a couple of other publications in that region, and I believe even started a foundation of some kind to help sort of bolster and ensure the future. Time is running short with us. Paula, I'm going to give you the last word. You devoted your entire column this week to this film and what it meant to you and what it sort of prompted you to be thinking about the future of this industry. What do you take away most from this?
Well, as much as I love the film, I don't want to see any more of these films about dying newspapers. That's the truth. And then, like I said, I mean, I do think Vermont is and New England in general, Angela knows this, New England's very, supportive of their newspapers. So I'm grateful that we're not in a town like that. It just looks very challenging, although I did have this business idea about the Spanish thing. But this tax credit that Angela mentioned, I don't really understand it. That's in the reconciliation bill. Actually, was talking to the New York Times yesterday, and we both agreed. We realized at the end that neither one of us understood what it was. But whatever, anything along those lines is going to help. I think we all need as much help as we can get at this point.
Right.
But reading is the most important, is the greatest contribution. Just keep reading the papers, and we hope people find them useful.
I can't find a better note to end on than that. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. The full 90-minute version of Storm Lake will premiere on Independent Lens on Monday, November 15th at 10 p.m. on Vermont PBS, and will also be available to stream online. This conversation is going to be archived on the Vermont PBS YouTube page, so come check it out anytime. And I want to thank so much our panelists this evening, Paula Routley, Angela Lynn, and Susan Allen, and to you, our audience, for all your wonderful additions to this conversation. Thank you so much, and good night.